Good day. I'm Juan Bezaury, a Mexican member of the privately protected areas and nature stewardship uh, group of the World Commission on Protected Areas. Here today, I'm going to talk about ensuring PPA's permanence, which is covered in the fourth section of IUCN's guidelines on privately protected areas. In In 1974, my parents bought this fantastic 25-acre piece of misty conifer forested land with a stream, a waterfall, and several ponds near Mexico City, part of which you can see in the background, to be used as a weekend country place. I was the principal caretaker of the land until I moved to Cancun to work on the Siancan Biosphere Reserve. But other members of the family kept looking after the place, with our parents providing the funding to care for the land until their deaths. Fast forward 47 years to 2021. Nine siblings, six wives or husbands, 13 grandchildren, and as of now, five great grandchildren later, the permanence of the place as a PPA is jeopardized. Simply put, an appropriate legal mechanism and governance mechanism to guarantee its permanence was not established. And while the place is still being looked after, nobody knows for how long. It will remain within the family, since most probably it will be sold. With this, all the beauty and memories of family and friends who love the place will go. There's long-term intent is the key to permanence. Long-term intent in was proposed as alternative to long-term conservation for government protected areas. PPAs should demonstrate an intent to conservation in perpetuity or at least long term. With PPAs, it's understood that it can take time to put in place arrangements such as covenants, tenure agreements, etc., which ensure permanent protection. PPAs thus should demonstrate conservation in perpetuity or at least the intent for conservation in the long term. The latter being defined in this case for a minimum of 25 years. Of the 34 principles included in the guidelines for privately protected areas, two of them deal directly with ensuring their permanence. Principle 4.1, PPA governance should embody the long-term intent to achieve conservation and its approach through 7 best practices. And principle 4.2 indicates that many different private conservation instruments can contribute to PPA permanence, which include 2 best practices. Principle 4.1, PPA governance should embody the long-term intent to achieve conservation. This should demonstrate that the PPA status will transcend changes of ownership through easements, covenants, wills, transfer of development rights, and other appropriate legal means. When formal agreements relating to PPAs are short-term, demonstrating a commitment to long-term protection, e.g., renewable agreements or long-term stated objectives, can be used to demonstrate long-term intent. Active or passive management practices being applied in order to safeguard the integrity of natural resources present in the PPA that are validated by government or local and regional units of national associations uh, of PPAs with guidelines and national diversity. Areas, for instance, areas owned by the National Trust of the UK are some of the most secure protected places in the United Kingdom. Best practice 4.1. Permanence is best secured through legal instruments, empowerment governance. Long-term conservation PPAs is often most effectively achieved with a legal conservation instrument linked through an institutionalized conservation agent or legal status through an appropriate government agent, such as the case of Brazil, the United Kingdom, and New Zealand and others. Provisions within land trusts incorporation charters that include appropriate conservation land disposition practices to same-minded institutions, guaranteeing the persistence of conservation objectives in case of foreseeable land trust institutional failure, are also considered as the appropriate legal conservation instrument. So, permanence, permanence, permanence. Practice 4.1.2. Where legal instruments are not possible, agreements should be renewable and the conservation intent should be in perpetuity. Short-term governmental financial incentives, such as payment for ecosystem services, could be a point of entry to short-term private lands conservation practices. But the ending of an agreement does not necessarily mean the ending of PPA status if they intend to find an alternative mechanism for long-term conservation. One of these examples is the Payment for Ecosystem Service program in Mexico. Here is the sign of a property in Sierra de las Navajas in Hidalgo, which receives such payments. Best practice 4.1.3. Where legal instrument or status is not available or feasible, some transparent proof of long-term intent should be developed. Proof of this long-term conservation intent in writing available to interested parties together with a description of how the intention will be implemented over time. Long-term management plans can also provide this type of proof, and changes should transparency. Transparency does not have to mean that information is available to everyone, but this information should be provided to a recognized land conservation institution, an established PPA network, or an appropriate government agency. Best practice 4.1.2. Individual conservation intent should be secured for future ownerships. This is critical. A clear succession plan for the continuation of the PPA status should be required, including land use restrictions, financial, and transfer of ownership. Problems could arise if no legal instruments are in place for achieving long-term protection of the land, water, and no planning for the financial resources required for management, e.g. trust fund. An alternative is to make legal provisions to transfer governance and or ownership to a conservation management institution, a like-minded NGO, a formal land trust, or other such entities. Best practice 4.1.5. Being part of a private conservation network can help ensure long-term conservation. Permanence of protection can be more likely when landholders organize themselves formally with intent to privately preserve and manage lands over the long term. Here we see the Valero property, a large private hunting reserve in Spain within a national park. The private owners in this case have a land stewardship agreement with the Foundation Naturaleza y Hombre, Nature and Man. Best practice 4.1.6. PPAs should have mechanisms in place to ensure that the intent for conservation does not change with leadership. PPA owners with short-term planning cycles or where leadership and landholding can change rapidly, for instance, companies, can potentially affect the continuity necessarily for long-term conservation. Ensuring conservation focus can be facilitated through policy approved by the oversight body, as well as reserving seats for representatives with a conservation focus on decision-making boards. The picture shows the Nature Conservancy's reintroduced herd of bison into a Luno Ranch in Janos Biosphere Reserve, Chihuahua. The property was held by TNC for a few years and further transferred to the Mexican Fund for Conservation of Nature, but TNC keeps retainers to guarantee its long-term protection. Best practice 417, government programs enabling and encouraging private conservation should include provisions for permanence through official government recognition provided at a national or subnational level, through economic or tax incentives offered, or through their integration into government conservation strategies and thus into wider biodiversity protection systems. Principle 2, many different private conservation instruments can contribute to PPA permanence. The number of PPAs is growing globally, and the number of people involved in the range of practices also. As the diversity of types of PPA develops, there is an increasing range of approaches which can contribute to ensuring permanence of conservation outcomes. The best practice 421 says conservation restrictions limiting some uses while allowing others can be effective conservation too, and can sometimes meet the definition of PPA. The glossary within the PPA guidelines explain the scope for some available conservation tools, not all of them, but these: the appurtenant easement or easement appendant, a conservation easement, the covenant, easement in gross, fee simple ownership, transfer of development rights, and usufruct. In Chile, for example, recently in 2016, pioneered a new legal instrument for private land protection called Derecho Real de Conservación. Previously, the legal system required that a conservation agreement, a servidumbre in Spanish, can only be made between two adjacent properties. Now it can be made between properties that are not adjacent. This is the situation for civil law systems, the Roman Code, versus the common law, which is the British system, which was also adopted by its colonies, where you don't need this adjacent situation. So Chile did something that many of us should copy from now on. Best practice 422, processes should be put in place to deal with potential violations of conservation restrictions. There should be a mitigation and action plan prepared to whenever compliance issues arise. The plan should indicate when the enforcement organization should negotiate breaches or obligations on where or when it should take legal recourse. Here, it's important to indicate that availability of financial resources to be used to pay for legal fees should be part of the above-mentioned action plan. Thank you very much for your attention. Hope we all learned something from this presentation.